So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to those who are in the chamber and also to those who are joining us on live stream. As always, we start with apologies, and we have an apology from Mayor Clark, who is co-chair of our Regional Development Forum, which is being run today. So he's away on council business. So for that reason, I'll be in the chair for this meeting. Declarations of interest. Does
Move the
any
apologies
member
accepted.
Sorry?
Move the apologies.
Oh, okay. Okay. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. So moving to declarations of interest. Does anybody have an interest in any of the matters to be discussed today that have not already been declared? Evelyn?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So you'll, it's your judgment, do you feel you need to retire from the chamber at that point, or will you just sit quietly?
I'll just sit quiet.
Okay. I find that hard to believe, but anyway. Okay. Thank you. Public forum, we have no one who has asked to speak. There is on your agenda a major late item. However, that has been withdrawn and will be considered at the extraordinary council meeting, which is likely to take place next week. The next item is the hearing on fees and charges, consultation, and we have Rodney Tribe here who's going to present to us. So Rodney, would you like to come up and sit in the chair there? And if you wish to speak for 5 minutes or so, then we'll ask you some grueling questions.
If you have any. Kia ora and good afternoon, everybody. Most around the table know me. For those that don't, Rodney Tribe, resident and ratepayer, and some would say I'm passionate about dogs. I'm more passionate about the pootier in my pocket, to be honest. So you would have seen my submission fairly brief. Bit of background behind that. Submissions closed on the 6th. I was away on the 6th. I requested information that I got on the 4th. So pretty much put in a short one. Since then, I've received information on and off, and the last lot of information I received was at about 6:34 last night. So council might want to tidy up its information distribution processes. So first one I'll touch on is dog control. Obviously last year I said that fees didn't need to rise. They were bound to rise more than they are this year. That was held off. This year fees are due to rise on some dogs, not all. I still don't believe the council should be looking at increasing fees. Those that are going to be affected the most are standard dog owners. I'm not one. I'm a responsible dog owner, so it's $2 to me. It's nothing. However, when I look at the numbers, across all the dogs that council believes it's got registered, you're talking 20 grand. That's how much that those owners are due to pay more than what they were last year. However, dog numbers apparently are down by 500. It's almost 60 grand's worth of dog registrations that have disappeared out of the ether, and you only want to take 20 out of the existing owners that are still left. I'm saying keep them as they are. Try and find these dogs. Council hasn't lost 592 dogs. From 2 years ago, you had 9,900. Council are now saying you got 8,503. It's 1,400 dogs. Invercargill hasn't lost 1,400 dogs. With the amount of dogs that have been found, shown online, non-chipped, there's a number of dogs out there that are actually coming back into the population that aren't being registered. The question is, why aren't they being registered? I believe that some of these people are struggling to pay their fees, hence the reason they'll take a gamble, won't pay a registration fee, potentially they're too high. You get more dogs registered, you could keep the cost down. So what I'm saying is, Next year, you're probably going to have about 289k still sitting in reserves after your capital. What's 301 according to the paper I got, but it should be about 289. Take 20k out of that. Keep your rego fees where they are for now and work on how you're going to register those or get those unregistered dogs done, especially for those that are struggling financially. So that's me on dogs, short this year. The next one I put in there was water fees. Interesting analysis on the cost of water. $1.53 a cubic metre, $1.44 if you take off your exploratory trying to find another water source from last year. However, the commercial users between 2021 and 2022 reduced their consumption by 14%. Council's volume of water that they actually treated went up, but your commercial users went down. So you've got a sector that's trying to conserve, who's now being paid, because you're conserving, you're going to pay more because it's costing us more because we're producing X amount and it's costing this. So when I had a look between your commercial metered and your tankered water users, they use 31% of the total water, yet from an operational cost perspective, they paid 38% of costs in the user fees. So I believe they're actually paying enough. I do get, having watched the workshop the other day, the council might start getting tight in terms of the rates they take versus the total amount of revenue, hence the reason to push user costs in certain areas up a bit more to get that balance. But I don't think pushing water fees up is the way to go, and I'm quite adamant on that. I believe that what's being charged at the moment is probably sufficient. The biggest cost the council has, despite me having heard that the biggest cost of water is treatment, the biggest cost of water in Invercargill is your capital expenditure on asset renewal. You can't tell me that's all contributed to by the commercial users, who are also ratepayers, so they're paying rates as well. So that's me on water. Next one, and it's real brief, is your environmental health costs. So I did query it last year. Just had a brief look. So all your food related charges are supposed to be based on cost recovery. So your audits, your licensing, your verification. So I've asked for where all those costs sit, and I can't get a clear breakdown. If I can't get a clear breakdown, I look at it and go, well, how can that be based on cost recovery? It's not transparent. Alcohol licensing falls in there as well, so it's a bit split. But yeah, to me, the information I got was fairly bland, so I don't think, well, it's probably going to go up, but it needs to be looked at more. And then I'll get into the last one, your housing care activity. I do not believe this is the time to be pushing rents up on those in the community who are struggling, have been struggling for years, and are probably some of the most vulnerable. I keep hearing we've consulted the public don't want rates going towards it, therefore it's got to be user pays. The public haven't actually been consulted. There's been surveys run which have, how would I put it, closed questions, basically. You get the result you ask for. So within the last survey it said other forms of funding. I ticked that box. No one wants their rates to go up, but I says look for other forms of funding. That doesn't mean user pays. And I think I mentioned last year about community housing providers. So I know council are looking at building some new units down Stirrat Street. Great idea, brilliant stuff. I would say, does council want to own them in their own right? Or do they want to own them through a community housing provider, say under ICHL? People in those units, being brand new, could in fact, they won't get a government accommodation supplement. However, they'll only pay 25% of their income in rent. The government will pay the balance. So in actual fact, you get more out of those houses. Now I know Christchurch City Council put all of theirs into a CHP and under a trust. they probably did it slightly the wrong way, whereas the existing tenants were transferred with the accommodation, so they actually don't get those subsidies. They don't get rebates. But I look at it and go, you've got an opportunity, and I know you're going to look at it next year or part of the long-term plan, to actually say, do we want to keep these units as they are, or do we want to build some new units, empty existing ones? Once they're empty, they're not housed, transfer those empty units to a community housing provider, start refilling them, and it's actually a win-win-win, except for council's balance sheet. Because with those assets sitting under a community housing provider, they might not sit on council's books directly, which was very enlightening when I saw that, according to the figures I was given from council, your building valuation is $91.8 million. That averages to $420,000 a unit of your current stock. I doubt that those units are worth $91 million. In actual fact, QV puts them at 26 mil, and that's not GV, that's their estimated value of what they are. Even if you were to take half of that again, tag it on top, that's 39 mil. You've got asset valuation in there of 91, and you're depreciating it by about $1 million. I know that it's not paying that depreciation, but that depreciation's obviously sitting somewhere. I look at that and go, those assets aren't worth that. So if those numbers don't stack up, what else do? But again, you're looking at 89 grand in additional rents roughly, taking the average of $8 over those units. At the end of last year, there was 697K sitting in your net debt account. Fund it out of that until you actually work out what you want to do with housing. Don't ram it on the tenants. Yes, they might get an increase in their accommodation supplement this year. Let them have it. They've already had a 30% increase. I know that was to bring those units up to healthy home standards. You've also used some Three Waters funding, I think, towards it. So be it. But don't, how would I put it? This will be the socialist coming at me. Don't hammer the most vulnerable at a time when everyone's suffering. That's me.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodney. As you predicted when we spoke just before the session, you would use the whole 10 minutes to make your points, and you have. So we'll only have one question, and I'm going to allow myself the luxury of that. That was an extraordinarily well-researched submission. So thank you for that. My question is, have you ever thought of standing for council?
I think I did in 2016.
Okay. You should think about it again. Thank you.
Cheers, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks, Rodney.
Thank you. So we have a second hearing. In this case, the submitter will come in by telephone, and it is Bridge and Vedmail QR. So if we can make contact with them, then Oh, hello. This is Tom Campbell here. I'm the Deputy Mayor, and I'm chairing the council meeting. I believe you wish to make a submission to council by telephone, and by the way, I should say that you're live now, so we would very much welcome your submission. Hello? Hello? Could you hear me at all?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So, this is Tom Campbell here. I am the Deputy Mayor. I know that you wish to make a submission to council on the telephone. So you are actually live at the moment. The whole council are here. And we are waiting to hear your submission if you wish to start.
Yeah, just because of we haven't received any more wins from the working income, and it is the disease of death. So every time we have to pay power bills and things, and it is big difficult for us to file for that much.
Okay, thank you, and I certainly understand what you're saying. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, that's the thing. And in winter time, we need some more warm clothes and things and to buy. So for that, we don't receive anything in winter.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, at the moment, nothing.
Okay. Thank you. So what we do at this stage is all of the councillors are here listening to you. We ask councillors if they have any questions to you. So I will just ask them that now. Does any councillor have any question that they wish to put? No, I think we... Okay, speak. Okay, so look, the councillors here have understood what you have said, so thank you for that. Thank you for your submission. We will perhaps close the call now, and thank you for that input. Thank you, and bye-bye. Okay, so we also have a list of submissions from individuals who do not wish to be heard. Do we receive the submissions? We do. Okay, so would anybody like to move that we receive the submissions? Thank you, Dan, and seconded by Leslie. Any further discussion? So those in favour of that motion say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So next we have the meeting of council held on the 26th of April and the minutes of that meeting.
I'll move those, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and seconded by Darren. Is there any discussion of those? Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'd like to raise an issue around item 11, and that refers to the recommendation that at least 50% of directors, this is in the SOI to Holdco, 50% be locally sourced. Now, I'm not happy with that. Since the 26th of April, I've read quite a few documents, including a report commissioned by the Office of the Auditor General. And when you read Section 57 of the Local Government Act, this quota type system does not fit in to their guidelines. They talk about skills and other necessary things. What I would prefer is council to change its wording to preferred local directors, and also, I don't know how you'd word it, but somehow work with the local Chamber of Commerce, which runs a leadership courses, and that potentially is where we could find directors and look to. But I think the quota, and when you say 50%, it is actually, because there's 5 directors on EIL, IAL, ICHL, you're actually talking 60%, because to achieve.
Councillor, I wanted you to, say what you had to say, and I think you made your point.
Yeah.
I mean, we are receiving minutes here. We're not relitigating the original matter. you know that we're receiving the minutes. So I think, you know, you've had the opportunity to make those points. But you cannot change the minutes.
No. I'm not changing the minutes. What I'm trying to say is that what we've basically done, I don't believe complies with both the OAG's guidelines and the Local Government Act. So we can receive the minutes, that's fine. But that obviously, for me to challenge this formally, would be through those processes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, it's my belief, and you know, as a former chair of some of these local businesses, that there is nothing about that would conflict with that guidance. There is nothing in that guidance that says that you cannot do that.
Do a quota.
There is nothing that says that you cannot do that.
It's interpretation. But the other thing I'd like to make is that is what we have done is inconsistent with a since recent appointment, directorship appointment to another council CCO, where we have appointed all of the directors outside the district.
I think that was but look, I don't want to get any real litigation.
No.
So I think we've heard what you've said. Yeah. So we will put that motion to the floor. It's been moved and seconded. So I'll ask those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you. So we receive those minutes. Next we have the minutes of the Infrastructure Committee meeting held on the 2nd of May. And Councillor Pottinger, I'll ask if you will move those, but also move the proposal which needs to be approved by Council.
Yes, I will do that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thanks, Grant. Is there any other discussion? So those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. That takes us to the minutes of the Community Wellbeing Committee meeting held on the 9th of May. And I'll ask Darren if you will move those.
Thanks, Chair. Happy to move that they are received.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Peter. Is there any other discussion? Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We then move to the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Finance and Projects Committee held on the 9th of May. And there is a recommendation to Council that comes from that. So Grant, could I ask you if you would move both of those?
Yes. Yeah, I will.
Is there any comment you want to make in the recommendation, or does it stand as it is?
No, it just stands as it is, yeah.
No, I think it just stands, isn't it? It's worded appropriately.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a mover seconded by Dan. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. We move to the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Risk and Assurance Committee held on the 15th of May. In this case, of course, the chair is not here, so I will move that we receive those. It's seconded by Councillor Soper. Is there any discussion? Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. So we now move to paper 11, which is in Rhiannon's name, I think. If I can get back to where I should be in my papers.
Just noting from that, Chair, that item 2 in the recommendations has already been done.
Okay. Rhiannon.
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, this paper speaks to the matter that the 2 public hearings were related to. This is fees and charges for 2023-24. So this paper provides recommendations to support your deliberations on the fees and charges and attaches a schedule for adoption, noting that, of course, it is possible to make changes to that schedule based on your deliberations. So the paper outlines a summary of the submissions that have been made, and and it includes officer recommendations in relation to those submissions. You'll note officers are recommending 3 changes to the fees and charges schedule as it was consulted on. The first of those is to note that we are expecting changes on the building control levies, and that would be passed on to the user if and when those are implemented. It notes that following consultation with the funeral directors, it's recommended to keep the discount at the level at which it is, but to explore further what the implications would be of bringing that service provision of invoicing in-house, and in the relation of resource management, clarifying the nature of the deposit and that it is refundable. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. First one just from me, Rhiannon. The fees and charges that begin, the paper that begins on page 51 of board books, that's an updated paper, isn't it?
The schedule itself, yes.
The schedule, it's been updated. Okay, thank you. Alan?
Yeah, wondering if you just, page 47, Rhiannon, there's a piece here about Cooper's Creek.
Yes.
Just wondering if you could explain what that means. It says feedback is noted and no change is required. What does that mean?
So the fees and charges as relating to Cooper's Creek note that they will not be implemented until and after the Ombudsman's decision is reached. There were a number of communications from Cooper's Creek's residents that they did not want made as formal submissions but have been provided to councillors to review. So it's just noting that we all recognise the process that's ongoing.
Thanks, Rhiannon.
Thank you. Any other questions? Rangi?
Thank you, Chair. Rhiannon, mine's around dog fees. Now, the calculation of dog fees, and this is sort of, I'm asking how it's done. Do we work out the cost of running the dog control service and then do we divide it, or is there a certain amount of public good from other ratepayers paying for the dog control service as well? I'm just looking at how we work out our dog fees, because I'm just looking at Palmerston North's dog fees and they are twice ours. So I'm just wondering, does it cost more to run it, or how it works? How we come to that number.
So the fees are set in line with the revenue and finance policy and what that sets in terms of the breakdown of how we fund each service, including the dog as part of the regulatory activity. And then the team works to review what their costs are in delivering the service and then calculate the actual fee. And so that's the process that it's gone through. More specific feedback I would need to direct.
So could I say it's not 100% funded? It might be 60% funded from dog fees and 40% from other rates, or Patricia's looking interested.
I'm just going to direct that to the GM of Finance and Assurance because I don't have the revenue and finance policy in front of me.
So dog fees form part of the animal control activity, and in the last LTP it was indicated that there was to be some benefit from rates to that activity. It's approximately around the 15%.
15%.
Funded by rates.
Right.
And then the balance is funded by fees.
No, that's fine. I'm just trying to work out why our fees are so low compared to other councils. So, no, that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Darren, then Grant.
Thank you. My question, somebody might be able to help me, is in around housing care. And I was just wanting to understand the accommodation supplement that people are paid. Is that a full sum, or is it proportionate to whatever the rental they are paying is? So in other words, do they get, say, $50, and if their accommodation is less than that, they keep the difference, or is it only paid out based on what their rental is?
So I have colleagues here from the housing team. If I could invite them to come forward to answer that question.
Through you, Chair. I have with me Deborah, who is our housing officer, who has also quite a comprehensive understanding of how the accommodation supplement works. So it might be best if Deborah was to explain how. So it is based on the level of rental and the asset level as well, and any other income level that they may have. So there is a threshold for the cutoff for the level of rental, and then that is determined on what their income is, how much assets they have, and what proportion of the accommodation supplement they are eligible for. Does that?
So they're not paid above what their rental would be?
No.
I think the concern that was expressed by councillors when we talked about this at the workshop was an understanding of, even although the increase was relatively modest, if I remember it's $8 or $9 or something like that, but it's a small amount, but actually quite a lot to some of the individuals concerned. So the discussion was about whether the housing supplement would be likely to pay some or all of that. And I think the answer was, well, it depends on the circumstances. There was no single yes or no answer. But I think councillors would be interested in perhaps a little bit fuller explanation than that. I mean, put simply, will the $8 or $9 extra they have to pay, is that likely to be paid as a housing supplement?
I can't answer that for all of the tenants
No.
because it does depend on circumstances. There has been an increase to the supplement level, to the level where they are eligible to apply for rental. There hasn't been an increase to the amount of supplement in Invercargill, but it increases the eligibility range. So some tenants who may not have been eligible before may now be eligible under that criteria if we increase our rental.
Leslie, I know that Grant's next, but I think, Leslie, you were going to ask a question specifically on this matter, aren't you?
I was actually just going to ask, because Heather indicated that Deborah might have some more details. I was just going to ask before we get any deeper into the conversation if perhaps Deborah could come in.
So the great majority of our tenants, because of their circumstances, probably are eligible for the accommodation supplement. The threshold currently, as of the 1st of April of this year, is $124. So any rental above that then gets the calculation done on it to give them their accommodation supplement portion that they get. So as the rent goes up and is more above that $124, therefore they can get more accommodation supplement. So that's how it works, sort of simply, if that makes sense. It's only based on 70 cents in the dollar. So $70 is the maximum, but the difference between the $124 and what they pay, so if that's another $20, that's then calculated by 70 cents, and that's how the accommodation supplement amount is worked out, and that's what they then receive per week.
So, if I can, I'm probably misunderstanding that, but what I think I heard you say is that if the extra rent was $10, just to make the sums easier, if the extra rent was $10, then they would probably have to pay $3 themselves because it was only 70% that would be subsidised. Okay, thank you.
Gee, could I, just as a supplement while Deborah's speaking, could I just ask Deborah and Heather to remind us about the asset level that is part of the criteria for the occupants of our units? I think that'd be useful information for councillors to understand.
So as far as I understand, 8,100 is the asset level. I believe that's like a cash asset. I don't know the full way that they assess that, but that 8,100 is the threshold limit, so that they can have up to that amount and then still receive the accommodation supplement. If they have more than that, say for example they have 10,000, then they wouldn't receive that supplement.
Yeah, and that is why you've told us that the majority of our tenants we understand are eligible for the accommodation supplement.
Yes. Yeah.
Because we have a criteria on asset levels before they become our tenants.
We do, and a great deal of the tenants, and even the people that apply, quite often don't have anything at all. So obviously those ones do. Now, that's.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that it's very important that councillors do understand this issue, and therefore, thank you for coming and explaining it to us. Trish, is your question about housing?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I keep pushing Grant back, but I'm assuming yours is not about housing, Grant. So
Thank you through you, Chair. So do all the people who are eligible for the supplement, do they all access it? And are they given any support to access it?
Of the great majority, they do. When we did the big increases a couple of years back, we made sure that when we sent out the information to them that they got an accommodation supplement form and also a reply paid envelope so that could go back to work and income, so that made it easy for them. And I did assist some of them. I still have some that are of the mind, they've sort of old school mindset, but I've managed to change a couple of those over the last year, and just if I'm aware, and I get to know them quite well because I see them every 6 months, I get to know, and if I feel that I can sort of encourage them, even though they feel, I'm not going to take anything because I'm responsible for myself, if they have that attitude, I just try and work with them and just say, well, hey, look, you've contributed all your life. You're entitled to this. Do take it. Please do take it. And sometimes I have to help them with the forms and facilitate it and assist that. But as I said, I've converted a few of them. So I try and give them that continual ongoing support. And if they say they're struggling, I always make sure, are you getting the accommodation supplement? It's worth you seeing if you are entitled for it. And just try and encourage them as much as possible. But some of them are a wee bit staunch.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So I think we might end the housing discussion at that point. I think you can safely assume that you'll get cross-examined again next year. So, the kind of questions that we're going to ask you. So I think, any additional information you can provide us. I mean, councillors are mainly concerned that we don't push people into, real hardship as a consequence of very small numbers of dollars, which no matter how fair it might seem, it may not seem fair if you're on the other side of the equation and you're struggling for every dollar. So, please keep us, please inform us on that next year. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. So, Grant?
Yeah, so my question, thanks, Chair, is with respect to the funeral director's discount and the recommendation to not charge that. So there's a comment, a large impact on already tight margins. Is that the funeral director's margins?
Correct.
So how did we establish their tight margins?
That is the feedback being provided by
So
the
they
funeral.
told us they had tight margins?
Correct.
Okay, that's interesting. Then the 8%, what does that actually turn into in a monetised amount?
It equates to 0.15% of rates.
No, I see that, but in terms of what's the cost that they are receiving a benefit of in terms of monetary terms?
I think it is $100,000 across all of the funeral directors.
No, but each individual cremation or plot.
I can't give you that information. I don't know that information.
But
it's going to depend on each service that they've received.
Right. Because, I just don't see the commercial objection is real to us putting up those fees.
Chair, I see that the GM of Finance and Assurance might be able to give some information on the average.
Can't quite do the average. Through you, Mr. Chair. There is approximately 500 burials and cremations happening in the city. So that 100,000 divided by 500 would give you a very rough one, just by the number.
$200 per cremation.
But there's different costs, because it's a discount and a percentage discount, but that gives you
Alan, is
an
your
idea.
question the same subject?
It's about the same thing, actually. Just to tease that out a wee bit. From what I'm understanding, they're actually basically doing a job for us, are they? So in fact, if they didn't get that discount and do that invoicing job, there would in fact have to be somebody here that did that job. So in effect, the discount, you could say, could possibly go in a salary or something if it was dropped. All right, assuming that.
So yes, Councillor, through you, Chair, you are correct. The feedback from the funeral directors is that the families appreciate having one invoice, and essentially this is the feedback from the funeral directors, that as part of that process, then they are carrying the risk of non-payment. We certainly could, and that's why the recommendation is worded the way that it is, look at investigating further what it would mean to provide the service in-house, and that is something that we recommend doing through the engagement with the funeral directors. The question that councillors had earlier about whether that discount was being passed on to the families, it is not being passed on. It is being perceived by the funeral directors as a cost of business. So it's certainly something that officers would recommend looking at the pros and cons of implementing it in a different way going forward.
So obviously, you know, the costs which is avoided by funeral directors is passed on to ratepayers through the rates, so obviously it doesn't just vanish. So Grant, are you of a view, since you've raised the matter, that we should move to change that? I mean, I guess there are three options. One is that we accept officers' recommendations. A second is that we go with the original proposal. I suppose there's a third is that we do a step off. So you could go with a 4% discount, for example, and then step down to zero, you know, really signalling the intent that we step down to zero next year. Steve, I know that you've been involved in this.
We never signalled it as an option?
Pardon?
Could we do the stepped approach because we never signalled it as an option? I'm not sure.
So there's a question as to process there.
Yes, we have consulted on the 8% and the 0%, which is what we consulted on. So whether we could go to 4%.
It sounds better than 8. It's difficult to see who would oppose it. But I mean, you know, if we're not allowed to do it, then we're not allowed to do it. There's some hands went up and I missed. So I'll take you first then, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I absolutely understand your suggestion of the 4% stepped approach. However, that doesn't actually change anything for where that activity sits for the funeral director or for us ourselves. And a few of them have indicated in their submissions that if we were to increase the price at all, that they would effectively kick it to us and say, sorry, you'll have 2 invoices. And so we would immediately in-house have to pick up that resource. So it would be of my mind to continue pursuing with the recommendation and that we don't rise it, that 8%, but perhaps look at and quantify what that resource cost would be for us to bring it in-house for our next round of fees and charges.
So Evelyn.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think the thing for me is that it's not only that we would have to do the work, we would be carrying the debt. And I think this is what the funeral directors are drawing to your attention. That 8% discount that they receive, they carry the debt for however long it takes to be reimbursed for the services they provide. And whilst in an ideal world, we would think that everybody would have that amount available, the reality is many, if perhaps most, do not. So for X number of months, they carry forward, including the cost of our services on their books. So if we're asking them to do that, do we want to take that liability? We already know how difficult it can be to recover fees incurred for our direct services that we charge. This is something that we would be taking on board. It's a cost to us, whichever way you look at it, is the 8% cost to us for, the discount, lesser or greater than we would incur ourselves by charging and trying to recover.
Well, certainly as interest rates go up, you'd have to say that the two numbers are probably getting pretty close, wouldn't they? But Darren, you were...
Thanks, Chair. I'm playing devil's advocate here. And in the submissions from the funeral directors, they've said, well, they could kick it back to us, and we double invoice them. And they currently feedback that for their customers, that is a convenience that they only have to pay the one invoice. Well, ultimately, that becomes a business decision for them. If they want to carve out a point of difference over their competitor, it would be that we'll only make sure you've got the one invoice. So that's a business decision that they can make. Again, just I don't necessarily like it being held over us as a threat. Alternatively, it's a business point of difference that they're able to take up if they chose to.
Okay. So, Leslie, you've been waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having asked for the consultation feedback and got it, it seems to me that we've identified, while your idea of the 4% was quite a novel one, that it's not workable. We consulted on 8% or nothing. Having got in good faith the feedback, I'm tending to think that holding the 8% in place for the year while we do the full review as highlighted in the recommendation is actually the sensible way to progress it. We do need to look at the cost of council invoicing if that's what we decide is what we do. We haven't looked in depth at that. It's been raised as part of the consultation that there's a administrative difficulty there for the relatively small 0.15% for the next year. I actually think there's a lot of sense in saying let's do the review and actually map out what it means.
So I think the default position, I think, is that we would accept officers' recommendations unless there was a strong view around the table that we should not. There is certainly a view among some councillors that we should not. I get the impression, Grant, that they're probably in the minority.
Happy to be.
Yeah. So what I would suggest is that that we do ask officers next year to bring back a balance of this is what would cost council if we were to take it in house, so that we can better understand where the balance sits. And I think that would be very useful when we consider this issue next year. Are you okay with that, Grant?
Yeah, look, I'm happy. I don't agree, but I'll go with it. But I think, there's a couple of things you need to think about. You could send them one invoice a year. You don't have to send them 500 invoices.
No, but presumably we would carry the debt for a year then, wouldn't we?
Yeah. Well, we have not carrying the debt, we're just recovering it. We're not carrying debt, we're just recovering it more income.
Well, it's still foregone interest on the money.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay. So look, Garen, unless you wish to move that we reverse that recommendation. Okay. So are there any other questions to Rihanna? No. Okay. So in that case, we have a number of recommendations which are presumably shown on the board behind me. I don't think there's any need to take them individually. So will somebody move that we do all of those things, receive and note and adopt as listed there?
So I'll move that with the exception of item 2, which we've already done.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion? So those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So, Rhiannon, you are up again, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So this next paper relates to preparation for the long-term plan and specifically the element related to strategic projects. So outlines a number of recommendations.
And if I can, sorry if I can just interrupt you while I actually find it. My apologies, I managed to lose my place. Okay, page 117 of board books for anybody who's like me. So Rhiannon, this paper, I guess, summarises the discussion that was held on the 26th of April.
Correct.
by council on this matter of strategic projects, and we, I guess, traversed it for several hours, didn't we? So I don't think there's a need to go through them in detail. But what I will ask you to do before we take questions is there anything in this paper which materially differs from what was agreed informally by council on the 26th of April?
No.
Okay, so are there any questions of Rhiannon? And if not, will somebody move that we do all of the things that are...
No, Mr. Chair, I just need a point of clarification.
Right.
I think Andrew has identified that 9B refers to ICL. I think that should be HWCP. Yeah. So it's just a correction to the point there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Point.
It should be HWCP.
So with that correction, we are asked to do 10 things: receive, note, adopt, note,
14.
confirm.
They're over the page.
Ah, okay. So we are asked to approve or note many things. Is there any, if there are no further questions, will somebody move that we do all of those things? Okay, thanks, Dan. Is there a seconder? Thanks.
Barry.
Thanks, Barry. Is there any further discussion? And if not, we'll move the resolution. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. So the next paper is again in your name, Rhiannon, and it's housing an approach for directing disposal of land and property. In that case, we had a long-term plan workshop on the 18th of April on housing. We had another one on the 16th of May on the issue of disposal of land. And we spent, a day and a half really talking about these matters, so we won't repeat that now. But can I ask you the question I asked you in the last paper? Is there anything in this paper, in the recommendations, that materially differs from what council informally agreed at the workshops?
No.
Okay. So questions to Rhiannon? And there are no questions. And sorry, Evelyn, have you got a question?
It's a little bit difficult because we've got two different papers that are also, in two different places that are talking about the same thing in this.
You mean the disposal, the housing paper and the disposal of land paper? Yeah.
And I guess that what I'm struggling with a little bit is how we make those things talk to each other. So council doesn't have a huge amount of surplus land. We may think we do, but in actual fact, there's lots of reasons why we want green space and all those sorts of things. So the thing for me in all of this is is there a suggestion as part of the solution that we become a purchaser of properties that could be developed as opposed to currently vacant lots, to better utilise some of the spaces that are perceived to exist? And is that really the role that we should do? But it is a question that has been coming to my mind quite a lot, because how do we effectively create the space and utilise it best? And is that something that the private market is going to do, when what we're talking about is potentially housing densification or things like that? And it's not that I think we can resolve it today, but this is what this has brought to my mind. If we want more houses, but we don't want to use up our green space or even our brownfield space, how do we do that? And is that the more effective use of the housing stock and the buildings that we have now? Because we know that we've got a lot of buildings that are perhaps not as fit for purpose as they could be, but we don't have the power to do anything about it. So I don't mean to be an agitator or anything like that, but I do want to plant the seed that we may have to actually make some sort of fairly assertive decisions in the future to acquire the space to be able to intensify.
Or to find ways of encouraging others to
Or to find
acquire.
ways of encouraging others.
Because I agree with you 100%. I think that what we must not allow to happen is a progressively ageing and crumbling central city where we just keep filling greenbelt outside. That's not what we want to do. And I think in this paper, where we talk about the possibility of releasing some land for housing. I'm not sure if you were at that meeting actually, but if the land that we were looking at and were shown and discussed, most of it was within the city. So, but I also would agree with the point that we should not rule out the possibility of buying land where it makes more sense than just to have it crumble around us. Leslie, you were going to ask a question.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It's not so much a question, it's just to lead on from what Evelyn has said and what you've just said. I felt that recommendation 9 and recommendation 11 in particular did address what Evelyn's saying about the two things coming together. So 9 is saying that council would consider potential partnerships.
Yeah.
Now that does in fact leave the scope that part of that potential partnership might be an exchange of land or council investing in a parcel of land as part of a partnership. It's leaving it enough as a general recommendation in principle to cover several potential ways a partnership might come together. And 11, which we had talked about quite thoroughly, and you've referred to, is whether we do have our own land and or property holdings that may play a role either through reclassification or disposal. And yes, I think you've just indicated we have already started looking at the strong possibility that we do have some of those and that we could take action on them.
But
Evelyn is quite right to bring up the question of reserve and green space and so forth, but I think again 11 seemed to me written in a way that allows us to look at possible use of our own land or property without that needing to encroach on important green space.
Well, fundamentally, I think when it comes to land, in particular reserved land, we're making no more of it. God's making no more of it. So we should try to protect what we have. And I think that, underlying principle is actually what's trying to be captured in this paper. So I think we keep making sure that that's the approach that we take. So any other questions? Grant.
Yeah, just thanks, Chair. Through the discussions and the workshops, it consistently came up around we need to get some action and some momentum around actually delivering. So, it'd be good to understand, what the process looks like from here. Like when will we be looking to form strategic partnerships? When will we be looking to change land use, in some of the sort of bigger sections around that maybe could do with sort of a revamp, those sorts of things. When are we actually going to see some action around housing to start providing what we're talking about in these papers?
Yeah, that's right. And I think it comes to also that rather than just speaking about being prepared to consider these things, they were actually on the front foot out looking for the opportunities, aren't we? And inviting people in to talk to us about what might be done. And there is already some of that stuff happening, as you know, Grant. But I think going forward, we would be keen to be involved in that. So other questions of Rhiannon? Okay, so we have a number of recommendations. None of the questions I've heard I think would change any of them, but we maybe emphasise, well, we don't emphasise, but we maybe just particularly note number 9 and the importance of that. Will somebody move that we agree with all of those? Thank you, Leslie. There's a second in Rhea. Is there any other discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So the next one is also in your name.
It's me again.
Busy day. So this one is about the appointments of a committee for the Connected Murihiku Joint Committee. In fact, it's for an appointments committee, isn't it? Yeah.
So I'll speak very briefly to this paper, just to provide a bit of background and an update. So at the beginning of last year, as part of the Just Transitions process, one of the 7 work streams was supported through Invercargill City Council. It was a regional work stream. It was intended to look at specifically how should the community be supported through the potential closure of TY or any other economic shock. The other 6 work streams were focused primarily on economic aspects, so it was felt it was really important that the community was represented. So the project proposal that was put together resulted after an intensive community engagement period over the first half of last year. It was steered by a working group that included representatives from Mana Whenua and from the 3 councils across Southern Murihiku, as well as various community representatives who are active in the community development space. The proposal itself speaks to the things that the community said they felt were really needed in order to improve connections and resilience, which was around supporting those community leaders who are on the coalface, as it were. So those may be individuals working with specific community groups or individuals working with agencies that deliver social services. So that's the background for why the project has been designed in the way that it was. One of the things that was really important to the community was that the project be community-led and be able to evolve over time, and that therefore the governance structure that would be set up would be able to support that. The Mayoral Forum considered the question of the governance structure last year prior to the election. They had 5 different options put to them as to what could be a potential approach for a governance structure, and their preferred approach was a joint committee, which would be made up not only of council but of Mana Whenua representatives and direct community representation from people working in the sector. This intended to be a transitional arrangement so that over time the best structure that the community feels is the right structure going forward can be put in place. So that's the reason for the 18-month period. It's not intended to be a long-term structure unless that's what the community feels is needed. Probably the challenge that's going to be there going forward is how to get a group that's going to support this project, get off the ground, has the skills necessary, while providing representation across the very broad range of interests that are involved. So that's the background to the process. The role of the appointments committee is to support the joint committee coming into the fore and specifically to select the appropriate community representatives, which would be invited to apply through an open advertising campaign.
If I might start with the first question, Rhiannon. All this was discussed by the Mayoral Forum quite a long time ago. Nearly the whole Mayoral Forum has changed. I certainly detect a different mood with respect to creating yet more joint committees. I observe, if I've got this correct, that we're talking about a governance group of a reasonably significant number of people with 1 employee. Is that right?
Correct.
Right, so 1 employee, and the role of that employee will be to tie together the various community threads that are running, and I think it's well worthwhile work. My question, and I know it might be a year late, but my question would be why you would not simply fund it through Great South. I know it wasn't your decision, but I just wonder if you'd like to respond to that, rather than create another, 8 or 10 people or something as a governance group.
So that was certainly one of the options that was considered at that time with the Mayoral Forum previously. I can't speak exactly to the decision that was made around that, but certainly the background and the discussion was around the role of Great South in economic development, not in supporting community engagement, and not wanting this to weaken their focus on what the Mayoral Forum wanted them to be focused on, which is driving economic growth in the region. So that was certainly what was one of the things that was discussed around that question specifically. Speaking to the question of it being quite a rigorous kind of governance structure for what is in the first instance quite a small project, I think that's certainly correct. However, one of the big drivers in this was balancing up the concerns of the community for being able to influence representation, which they were able to do through a joint committee structure, with the needs of the funder, MB, which requires a certain level of governance. And so this was the structure that they have agreed to fund under, and that the Enduring Oversight Group has agreed.
So just to be clear, are you saying that this whole project will be funded by IMBI?
The funding to seed fund, as it were, the project will be funded by IMBI, and one of the roles of the coordinator will be to seek further funding. And
what does seed funding mean, Rhiannon? Does it mean her salary or his salary will be paid for a year or 3 years, or what does it mean?
Covers the costs for the first 18 months of the project, and should no further funding be achieved, then the project would be able to be wound up then with some website resources and best practice being developed. But it certainly is the role of that person to seek further funding from many different alternate sources.
Do we know whether any of the other councils have actually nominated people to be on that appointments panel?
So we've had initial conversations with the governance managers at both Southern District Council and Gore District Council, and it is on the agenda for those councils for I think the 1st and the 13th of June. But I could have got those exact dates not quite correct. We are first.
I'm going to open it for questions, but discussion. I think. I mean, to me, it seems a giant sledgehammer to crack a nut. When you have, maybe 8 or 10 or so of a governance group who are managing or governing the activities of one person, whose funding will only last for 18 months, and then inevitably they will look to councils to fund it beyond that. Nature of the project is such that it's not a job and finish after 18 months. There is no way. If you look at it, they're going to set up systems that tie together groups, and it's going to have a ongoing it should have actually some ongoing work. But look, could I open it to others to questions? Trish, you had your hand up, I think.
Through you, Chair. And do I understand that the funding is for 18 months, and part of that role is for the person in the role to get more funding?
Correct.
So in effect, the person is looking to have funding to continue her role.
To continue the work of the project, yes.
Yeah. So if there's no, I'm sorry, what I'm trying to understand is why would the project stop?
Exactly, there's no reason why it would stop. I'm just saying, except in the circumstances where no further funding was achieved.
But that person would have a personal initiative to find the funding, because it would have pay her salary, pay their job.
Well, one would hope that person would also be motivated by the benefits to the community, as well.
Yeah. Bottom line is that's what it is.
Yes.
Thank you.
Others questions? Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a really exemplary case of don't look a gift horse in the mouth, and then I don't know what the rest of the proverbial is, kick it somewhere you don't want it to be. MB is looking to give us and other councils money to further a piece of work that's actually really quite integral for our communities. It's bringing together those pieces that quite often don't typically get a lot of attention. There's been cases where we've worked really well with our other regional counterparts, and there's been some real success stories out of that. I would really hesitate for us to remove ourselves from this piece.
Okay. I mean, I guess there's no other questions, I think, but I guess my view would be that Scotsmen like free money. So the opportunity to get 18 months of money from MB to support the start-up of this, I think, we should not look a gift horse in the mouth. So I agree with that. I do wonder, though, whether at the end of that 18 months, when inevitably I think he or she will come to councils for funding to continue with the role. And by the way, coming out of just transitions and beyond 2025, there's many things like this, isn't there, right? And many people without funding for the roles. So this is just one of them. That maybe at the end of 18 months, we would be encouraging an approach of tucking it under Great South. You still got to pay the salary, understand that, but you don't have all the governance, additional governance cost. But in the meantime, we are asked to nominate 2 people to be on an appointments panel. I would propose that one of those should be from the Mana Whenua representatives and the other one should be from the broader council. I wonder whether anybody wishes to. I'll ask Mana Whenua first. Both of you are nodding. So so it's Panya. Okay. Is there a volunteer amongst the rest of council?
Could I ask Councillor Crackett if she's interested?
Yep.
Thank you.
I'll nominate
I was trying to stare and stare and stare her into looking at me, but she was resolutely not looking at me as I said that.
It's only an appointments committee.
Yep.
Okay. So I appreciate that. So I appreciate those volunteers. So Panya and Alex will select the members of that committee. I will be our nominees. Well, no, we appoint them, don't we? So we'll be appointed to the appointments committee. And, I guess we take it from there. I guess from the chair, I would encourage, though, as discussions moving forward along the lines of, let's not have a totally separate governance arrangement for only one person going ahead of that. Alan.
Number 5 says that we're not going to move that either does or does not seek representation, don't we? I mean, there's probably a few of us here that probably think it's.
Oh, we do.
I don't think we need to agree that at the moment, do we? I think we can leave number 5 on the table, can't we?
Number 5 on the recommendations.
We either do or we don't.
But we don't need to agree that.
So if we don't, then we don't need any representatives, do we?
Well, we need representatives on the appointments committee. I don't think, but Rhiannon's going to correct me, I don't think we really need to nominate people to be in the joint committee at this stage. I mean, that should be a matter of volunteers, and and it may be there's 5 volunteers, and that between Panya and Alex, they have to choose who it is.
You don't have to do that now, but it would mean another paper coming back at a later point. So it's really whether you want to discuss the matter again, because we would need a formal delegate. So it's really up to council whether they want to discuss that now or later.
I would like to have Alex and Panya get a feel for the whole thing, so that when a paper is brought back, we can be informed about how the whole thing's shaping up. So let's leave that number 5 aside, and we will come back to it. Not only a matter of kicking it down the road, it's the fact that it may be better to do it sequentially, I think. Okay, thank you. So we have 4 remaining for approval. Will someone move all 4 of those? You're my default person, Darren, so I always look at you. Thank you. Will someone second? Thanks very much, Trish. Is there any other discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about the leaving off of 5. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be for our 2 appointees to be appointed to an appointments committee for Connected Murihiku Joint Committee without dealing with number 5 in some form.
I think that we should say, I think we could certainly say it does seek representation in the joint committee. I think we leave the nomination of names until later.
Yeah, that's what I'm tending to think. Maybe a suggestion that we could go as far as to confirm that does seek representation.
If there is going to be a joint committee, we're going to be part of it.
Yes,
so
I think it would be good to at least have that there.
Okay, so
And reserves the right to
Yeah, and reserves the right to nominate.
name the person at a later date or something like that.
Yeah. Just to explain, I think that then leaves us with the ability to discuss with the other two councils when they've made their decisions whether all three of us have
yeah, look, I think
decided
there's,
one way or the other on that and perhaps want to come back to the councils. I just think it would be good to have at least something in there to indicate.
yeah, no, I agree with you. That's a good point, and I think also it will be a matter again of these appointments will be okay. We always want volunteers, but effectively it tends to be the mayor that appoints to joint committees. We will have by that time we'll have a new councillor through the election period that allows Nobby, I think, to look at the makeup of different committees and try to balance it out. So I think it's better to kick that party down the road. Okay, so we've what did we get to? We've had a move on seconder. How have we?
I'll second. I think Darren.
Darren moved.
Darren moved. Trish moved.
Sorry,
Trish.
You have to make sure they're happy with the change.
You happy with the change?
Ecstatic.
Okay, is there any further discussion? If not, I'll put the resolutions. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So the next paper we have is the draft statement of intent, but in fact that paper has been withdrawn by staff today, so we'll bring that one back. Is that likely to come back to the extraordinary meeting next week, or is it a longer?
So I can answer that. It's option for possible for next week, but I believe it's more likely to be the June meeting.
Is there any issues arise from that, Evelyn?
It makes me very happy that it's been withdrawn because I was challenged with some of the wording in it, and I was wondering how I was going to sit on my hands and keep my mouth shut. So
that was a matter where you declared
that
interest.
is a matter of my declared interest. So just because I had some concerns around which I have briefly touched on with the CE this morning because of some of the language wording in it, but I don't see for the board any issue. The more it's an issue for if council is challenged by the auditors for the fact that we have not done this, the fact that it's going to be unnecessary after after we have our first board meeting is
right. Okay.
The issue really.
So that's fine. So we'll come back to that at another time. Pardon? Rangi.
Thank you, Chair. Look, just curious, it mentions in section 3.2
of what paper? Sorry,
of the draft statement of intent. It mentions about an interim board creating the SOI. When it comes back, obviously a month away, will we have the new board announced? No. Obviously,
don't believe it announced.
I mean, obviously, selecting board, and I'm asking,
but they won't be in office by that stage.
Okay, and in the selection process, can I ask, since I brought it up in the minutes earlier, are we going for a selection process that has 50% local members?
Yes.
Of the new board?
Yes.
The only thing I would say in that, I mean, I think it's a practical reality that we are actually trying to attract Southland-based members, but of course that resolution, as I understand it, applied to HOLCO, not apply, I don't think.
I thought it applied to CCOs.
It applied to CCOs. I don't think it, but well, I'm willing to be corrected, but yeah.
Applied to all CCOs.
Yeah, CCOs. Yeah.
So we can expect when we see the board that 60% or 50% will be
I can
local.
say the council has already seen the proposed incoming board, and it has been, while the council doesn't approve it, you are aware of who they all are.
Yeah.
That is, of course, still in public excluded at the moment while the final stages of that are done, so I won't choose to elaborate any further.
No, but we would assume they're
yes,
going to be 50%
you have seen
local.
them. And there is a plan on how to address the 50% ratio.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, can I just say
sorry.
I'm a little bit nervous about straying into discussing a paper that we've actually withdrawn from the agenda
Ah,
any further,
yeah,
and I
well-
just wonder if the conversation needs to be closed.
Sure. I mean, I will. If Michael wants to say something, I'll.
Mine's not directly in relation to the paper. It's about the question in relation to the 50% shareholding.
No, it's 50% directors. Sorry.
50% directors. Sorry, my apology. This is only a CCO during why we've got the appointees, but in this particular entity, once it doesn't moves on to the next stage, it's no longer a CCO and doesn't come under that remit of 50%. Regardless of that, I would like to clarify that it has been the board's intent the whole way along to try and achieve that ratio, but it will not be a CCO and won't fall into that requirement going forward.
So, but it will still need an SOI, even though it's not a...
Not going forward. This is the last SOI.
Not going forward, just currently.
Okay. So with that clarification, I think, we'll take Leslie's suggestion that we move on. Yeah. Grant, I think you put your hand up, but was it the same subject?
Yeah.
So I think we do move on. So that paper's withdrawn. The next paper is the one headed amendment to governance statement, and essentially this is your name, Michael. This is essentially a tidy up, isn't it, of all of the changes that we've made in the last few months?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is absolutely correct. I think it's probably easier for me to stay here rather than trying to run down there all the time. But yes, in essence, it's just tidying up some recent changes, and we've also taken the opportunity to update the name of the Chief Executive. Not too much else I need to say there, other than we have identified that there is a conflict for Councillor Dermody in his new role as portfolio lead for the museum, because he is also the chair of the Finance and Projects Committee that is charged with having oversight of that specific project. It's not insurmountable. The suggestion would be that Councillor Campbell, you chair those aspects of the Finance and Projects Committee meeting. So it's an easy solution, but it's one that we do need to raise and flag.
Do I get more money?
Remuneration, reprioritisation is coming.
Half and nothing's nothing.
As we remember, the Deputy Mayor is the Deputy Chair of all our committees, so this is a very elegant solution. You could even say was designed for such occasions.
Yeah. So, do you need to say anything else?
No.
Are there any questions of Michael? Yes, Rangi.
Look, just a correction. Under my committee, the Infrastructure Committee, I see the deletion of Councillor Skelt, but it still states 11 members, and that we now have 10 members. So can we just get that corrected?
That will be corrected.
Thanks.
Good spotting. Thank you.
Thank you.
And unless we're going to appoint another member.
Well, potentially with the new councillor after the by-election, but we can change it then.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
But in the meantime, the paper should reflect the correct number, so the paper should change to 10.
Yeah. Right.
Agree.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions of Michael, then we will move to the recommendations. That we receive the report, that we note the changes, and that we adopt the new governance statement, which is changed in accordance with number 2, as set out in the appendix. Will someone move that? Thank you, Leslie, and seconded by Barry. Is there any other discussion? Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So the next paper is the proposed remit to the local government annual general meeting, which I believe has to be approved within 7 days or something. Is that correct, Michael? Because it's got a very short.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will very briefly introduce this from the procedural aspects, and then I will hand it over to Councillor Cricket. So in order to make the remits for the local government New Zealand annual general meeting, the remit is due to be submitted by end of day tomorrow. So there is a reasonably tight turnaround if this council wishes to endorse it. I understand from the paper, so for those of you who haven't realised, the remit has been changed, and that is now the paper copy in front of you. It has been updated on board books, but only if you've resynced your device since about 2:30 this afternoon. So we've got a couple of things that would need to happen for council to be able to endorse it, along with the young elected rep members. But I don't believe that if council chooses not to endorse it and leaves it simply to the young electeds, that will still be submitted. But I would probably make the one suggestion that the italics piece there probably should come out. I think that was just as a working comment rather than actually something that probably should go through to the remit.
Under background and context.
Yes, that's it. Thank you, Mr.
Recent
Chair.
examples.
Yeah, it was probably more of a working commentary, perhaps. Outside of that, I will very happily hand over to Councillor Cricket.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. The additions that went in was just an additional paragraph around contextually why Young Elected Members Network and Committee believes that it should sit in Local Government New Zealand. So this was advice that, and it's the fourth paragraph in the remit from the top. This was in consultation with Local Government New Zealand themselves as well. So, as well as our network and as well as National Council. So they've all fed in. National Council was really, really receptive. We had fantastic feedback around the table at National Council on Friday from mayors and chairs congratulating the young elected members for being the ones to champion this forward. So that's really supportive. Yeah, I guess there's a lot to say, and there's a lot to say in this remit. But I think our council being the one that recognising that obviously issues do arise, we've seen them before in our recent history, but just I'm really proud of us for even having this on the table to support this discussion in advance of the AGM. I think it's really clear for Invercargill City Council that we're all committed to helping assist the entire national network raise standards of behaviour. It's not just a reflection on us or historical items, it's actually protecting and safeguarding young elected members and all elected members across the network for future purpose. I think some key things that come around that feed into it, I suppose, is that the ability to triage issues and complaints and concerns as they arise is key. Quite often there's things that do arise that don't really have a place to go or don't really have a safe route to go. If there's investigation into a process or a triage system that sits with Local Government New Zealand, will really rise the possibility of people having a safe avenue to bring those forward. We also believe that there needs to be a really proportionate, flexible system with tiered escalation that meets the needs of any issue as it arises. Members currently aren't protected through confidentiality, so often those small issues that we've spoken about or that I've mentioned are left being unaddressed and that member potentially feeling unsafe to come forward. Local Government New Zealand becomes aware of issues at the moment only really when they escalate out of the point of control. We've seen that very recently just up the road here from our neighbours. And that actually ends up discrediting local democracy as a whole. So having this triage system here that can intercept some of these things before they escalate to that point, I think will really benefit local democracy across the motu. I think I'll leave it there because I could probably talk about this for a couple of hours if you'd let me, but I'd welcome any questions.
Rangi.
Look, my question is around, I'll just get to the paper. It's under background and context, and third paragraph, it's the last one, and ends in inverted commas, wet bus ticket. Now, what is proposed? Like, I've read through it, and I can't see anything suggested to replace the so-called wet bus ticket, because obviously I've looked through the Schedule 7 of the Local Government Act, and ousting of a member or censorship in sections 1 and 2 is quite brutal and requires either certain criminal activities and not being able to perform. So what is proposed? Because obviously if you do all the hard work at the start, where does this finally end up in trying to deliver something better than a wet bus ticket?
So I think you can answer it if you wish. I was going to say it's almost rhetorical, because the reality is the whole thing is it's asking the question rather than trying to answer it. So I don't know that realistically.
No. But obviously, the reason I'm asking is that if you call the existing punishments or things that are asked for the offending councillor to do, then there's obviously a bar being set. So does it need to be obviously greater, more severe? That's what I'm trying to get at. Obviously not the exact answer, but I mean the current penalties available are public apology, a removal from a senior position, like in the Act it says you can remove a chair, you can be removed from a committee, things like that are all available. Now, I'm just wondering where we're heading with this, because, as I said, it would be a shame to do all this work and then you're in a corner and
of course, it's asking LGNZ to do the work rather than us. But Alex, do you want to comment? Because
I would, Mr. Chair. Councillor Pottinger actually has a point. He absolutely has a point. But it is addressed in the Local Government Commission, Local Government Codes of Conduct. It's recognised in that document that basically the issues that he's spoken to. So the idea here is that, like you've said, Chair, if Local Government New Zealand is investigating into this and that sits with their resource rather than ours independently, councils are left not having to foot the bill all individually across the motu. It's independent from us, the investigation into it. And there's already findings that have come out of the Local Government Commission report that were scheduled to or recommended to be implemented as part of the Future for Local Government review. However, the report for Future for Local Government only comes out in July, and it was recommended that they should all be bundled together, but we don't know yet the future of the Future for Local Government review. So it is recommended that we progress this in advance of that.
Separately. Evelyn, you had your hand up.
So I'll comment on that point first. I think that if I look at what the findings are of an objective external review of behaviours, possibly would have a more serious impact on an individual than if we round the table say we don't like what you're saying or doing or whatever. We're not necessarily seen to be objective because we interact personally all the time. If you're, so to speak, found guilty by a jury of your peers, does that have more weight? Particularly if they're really objective, they don't sit around the table with you, they don't actually see your behaviours, they're not influenced by anything else but the reports and the interview process. That's the first thing. I did want to ask Alex, just in terms of, sorry, Councillor Crackett, in terms of going forward, if you've also socialised this with Maruata, because I think that it's something that I'm almost sure that they are really mindful of and really supportive of, but given the deadlines, we don't meet till next week. So that answers that question, thank you. And I would just really like to thank the Young Elected Members Network and the effort that you have put behind this personally, Councillor Crackett, to bring this issue forward, because it's something that you do hear from other people who work in this space. I've heard it over most of the years of my life that I've worked for local government. So to have done this and the thought and effort that you've put into it, I want to thank the young elected members. It's a great, great stride forward, I believe, if it's taken up by us.
Thank you. So I've got Leslie, then Alan, then Ria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I'm not going to ask any questions, but I am going to make a comment. To me, this is exactly the sort of independent nationwide process that many of us had hoped would have been in place before the Invercargill City Council ended up in the situation we did a few years ago, where we had 2 independent appointees appointed. and a quite expensive ad hoc undertaking. To me, this is a catch before crisis triage.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who are part of the health sector, triage does actually mean what it says it means. If you can catch before crisis, which is what this remit is all about, then it's a brilliant idea. There has been an enormous amount of work go into it to get it to the drafting it is at the moment. I have to say, good on the drafters who have put the work into it, because I think it's covered all the bases, as well as bringing in what the commission's got in their papers, which are and the sense of not waiting for that final decision, but actually taking the issue that the sector needs addressed and running with it. It's just really good to see it here, to get around what we know is an ad hoc situation. I mean, we've had the ad hoc situation with Tauranga, who ended up with commissioners. We ourselves ended up with 2 appointees. There are heaps of other examples around the country where there have been ad hoc and very expensive crisis solutions. If our GNZ has got something like this, a well-supported remit that actually sets up an independent nationwide process, then I think this is to the benefit of the sector, and it's actually one of the things we discussed in our wind up of our own situation a couple of years ago, that we could use the learnings we had from that to contribute to improvements for the whole sector. And to me, here is part of actually doing that. So I'm a big supporter of this remit. I would certainly like to see Invercargill City Council add our names as one of the supporting bodies for it with the young elected members, and good on the young elected members for picking it up as an issue. I think it is a real step in our GNZ having the chance to really improve outcomes for our sector, and the respect in which the sector's held at a pretty important time for local government to be actually showing that we can do our own stuff. Medical Council and Nursing Council have got their own independent processes. Our GNZ probably should have done this years ago. It wasn't there. We know it wasn't there because to some extent we looked for it and found it wasn't there. So great.
Okay, thank you, Alan.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to probably talk quite so long, but I see what this would do, but I also personally, I'm not a huge fan of the LGNZ, and I also and it probably goes back to the Three Waters issue with the government. That's just my personal view, and I always think that the code of conduct is set up to deal with these sorts of issues, and when there is an issue, the person who's appointed normally is a local person, so they probably often understand the people that are involved in a situation, whereas if in a situation, if you used a sort of a body from the LGNZ who were remote from here, they wouldn't have any idea who the people involved were. And I just think that we would have no control over who those people were. I think that we already have the process in place, or to handle any issue, and I still think even with this here, with the situations with Tauranga and with our recent our own issues over the last six or so years, you still would have had government intervention, and LGNZ wouldn't, because it's our own group. You have to get the government sign off to do that. So I still think there would have been government intervention anyway. So I just don't really see the requirement for this when we already have a process in place that is there to handle any issues that we may have as a council.
Okay, thank you. Rita?
I can't find the right words. I'm going to try. I understand the intent of this remit. I totally get that. I'm just not quite comfortable with some of the areas within it, because it raises matters to me of actually the first issue is suitability of candidates in local body elections. What are those guidelines there? Is there any type of restriction around who can become a candidate, apart from the, I guess, if you haven't been, what was it, in jail or found of a crime of 2 years. Well, yes, that too. So I guess for me, I feel a little bit uncomfortable because I wonder if at the same time we're trying to find a solution to fix a problem around the country due to situations that arise through different issues within councils. And in fact, are we opening up a can of worms at the same time? One of the areas is the loss of confidence in some areas of local government New Zealand. Can we, I guess it's, do we lose our local ability in terms of voice and decision making when it comes to complaints when more serious issues are at hand and there's no way for us as a council to I guess remove a councillor. So I think that this is a step in a good direction, but I at the same time don't quite think it goes far enough. And
it doesn't go far enough.
No. So that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to figure out how to best explain where I'm feeling with this.
Okay, so we'll keep going around. So actually, Dan's first in with Panya.
I'll start with where I think Rhea was trying to head. If you're looking at the suitability of candidates, completely different kettle of fish. Look, I commend Yim for the remit. I think the concept of it is really good, because what we have to do when something comes up through a code of conduct process is get somebody independent in to investigate it. Really, here's a similar process that is potentially much easier and takes some of the local responsibility away from people who could direct things in a way that perhaps compromises that independence. Alex, can I ask a question of clarification? Is it just for internal complaints, or is this also a process that's looking at dealing with complaints from people external from within local government?
At this stage, it's looking internal.
Right.
There has been a couple of questions raised through some wānanga that we've had about it at Young Elected Members Committee around whether or not the support process or whether or not the process in consideration of the investigation will look towards CEs and the relationship between CEs and mayors, because we've seen obviously breakdowns in those over time. The conversation has sort of centred around that entities like Taituara and those partnership sort of entities would be also spoken to as part of that investigation and may want to upstand something similar to work in partnership with Local Government New Zealand around those issues.
Okay.
Does that make?
Yep. No, that does. That helps tremendously. The only caveat I'd put on there is I think once, if the idea gets support and the remit's passed and the process goes into place, we can expect an increase in our LGNZ membership fees, because the stuff ain't going to pay for itself. And as we know from personal experience, it's not cheap.
Panya.
I just wanted to sort of note that the processes that we have in place haven't really worked for us, worked for this council. And I think what you've put forward gives an independent voice or view on any sort of matters that would impact on this council. So I think from where I'm coming from is a good thing. So I think I do want to acknowledge the work that's gone into this as well.
Rangi.
It was about the process following this, and so do we require, when it goes to the conference in July, is that right? It goes, yeah. Do we require just a majority of the 67 TAs to adopt this? Okay, and then what happens when it requires, because what's been proposed so far will require changes in the Local Government Act, probably Schedule 7. So for it to actually enact, because if you look at the Code of Conduct that's featured in the Local Government Act, and that obviously needs changing because that's the one we're working on now. So does that have to go to a bill before Parliament, and who instigates that?
I'm assuming, and I'm, somebody can correct me. I'm assuming there's an opt-in, opt-out clause in it. I mean, it's not something where you're legally obliged. I don't think it's proposed you're legally obliged to go to LGNZ. LGNZ is a members organisation, isn't it? So you would opt in and you would follow that route. And I guess in theory you could opt out in a particular circumstance. I think if it was opt-in, opt-out, I don't think you'd require to change.
Oh no, it would. I believe it would require in the Act, because the Act is what gives teeth to everything we do, including our governance statement, everything. Michael, have you got a comment on that?
Yeah, so, in essence, this wouldn't necessarily need a change to the Local Government Act immediately, but if you follow through what the Local Government Commission in their report was saying, and some of their recommendations, then yes, there would need to be changes ultimately to the Local Government Act. But the remit as it's standing and what it's seeking to set up is, as Mr. Chair has indicated, it's a model that would be able to opt in, opt out. But you are quite correct, Councillor Pottinger, in terms of sanctions available. They are what are available under the Local Government Act, unless agreed otherwise.
And so, just my last question is: so then, if it was opt in, opt out at that level, and rather than a Local Government Act level, does the sanctions have teeth? Does anything that gets that you opt into, does it actually have teeth?
If the councils all agreed to opt into it, then potentially yes.
Potentially. Legally has teeth.
Yes, but again, it would depend on what LGNZ and the working body who would be set up to follow through with this remit comes through with. And that would be a very interesting discussion to see in the fullness of time.
Not a question, it's a comment. I think we might be running ahead when we should be walking. What the remit's asking for is an investigation into the creation of an LGNZ independent body. It's suggesting working with the Local Government Commission, who's got a very full paper there with a lot of meat in it. I agree with what Michael said about possible changes to the Act. At some stage in the future, there may be a need for something, but the way this remit is written is not going to lead to an immediate need to change the Act. It's going to lead to an investigation in conjunction with the Local Government Commission, whose paper we're well aware of, and some work on a serious issue that would lead to an opt-in, opt-out, yes, which has got the potential to do some great things for the sector. I think running ahead to talking about being worried about changes to the Act and the need to put things before Parliament is getting well down the track of where we're heading with getting this remit on the floor.
Okay. I want to take, thank you, Leslie. I want to take more questions except mine. Alex, I mean, I support the thrust of this, no question. I mean, this work should be done. As Leslie's observed, but we're not voting for anything other than kicking off an investigation. I do, though, have a couple of questions, and I guess they are expressing a little bit unease, although I still support the general thrust. So the first unease is that in at least two places in this, it talks about the how can we remove the exposure to defamation charged by, someone who raises a complaint. To me, that broadens. As soon as you start, I don't know if you use the word defamation, but that's what it means. As soon as you start to talk about that, you're really in a whole different ballpark, because defamation is a protection which individuals have in law, which is common law. I think dating back 1,000 years. It's not something that you change lightly. So that was the first comment. I think there already is actually some protection through partial privilege or something they call it. If you raise a formal complaint, for example. All right. Qualified privilege. Right. So to extend that privilege to in a way that would, let's say, lift the risk of defamation, feels to me as though that would be the council going too far to support that proposal. It's not quite, I know what's in here, but it kind of pushes it in that direction. That's my first point. My second point is that I think a remit should be very tightly worded. We've already agreed to take out what's in italics on the second page, mentioning councils. I think, you know, inappropriate to mention councils by name. But I did feel as I read it that the same point is made several times in several places. And you could probably reduce this to by half, you know, just by a very tightly worded remit, and it, you know, it would be, I'm going to use the word emotive because it is emotive in places. Now I know it's emotive in places because it's an emotive subject, but, you know, nevertheless. So two questions I guess I have for you. One is, I'm interested in the views of the other councillors because it's only me to say that, but whether you would be prepared to change the wording with respect to, I'll use the word defamation. I forget if you actually use that word defamation, but to, you know, so that it does not appear that council is supporting a removal of the possibility of defamation. And the second question was really whether you would consider working with Michael overnight to try to get this maybe down into a 1 page or 1.5 page document. I just think it loses impact as you read it. It kind of loses some of its impact when you get to, as you get through it. So they were, I think, two questions that I had for you. But it doesn't change the fact that I support the thrust, which I think actually the remit, the first 4 lines pretty much covers that actually.
May I? I take both of your points. The first I'll address in the condensing of the words. This remit has been endorsed by the Young Elected Members Committee as it stands. So we've got really minimal time to cut down what we've got, get it back to them, get them to ratify it, and then get it across the line again. It's unfortunately time constraint. So I would have to say at this time, sorry, but no.
Let's take it or leave it.
Yeah.
What about the removal of that paragraph which Michael referred to at the beginning in italics, where I would not support it going with that because it mentions other councils, and I just think that's inappropriate.
I'm sure I could make that happen, but the rewording of the entire thing would probably be a bit too extensive. Okay. My second point, to address your second point, Deputy Mayor, it states that, the intent of it is that if there is an issue that arises, again, there's a triage system, so we're thinking on the lower level here. If there's an issue or a behaviour or a comment that arises, that there is a clearly defined map that person can follow to raise it and address it in a manner that doesn't quite escalate to a code of conduct. In the manner where it escalates into a code of conduct, that's where you can get into, and the line it says, in worst case scenario can lead to defamation proceedings in High Court. Now that's the worst case scenario. That's not saying here that we're taking any or removing any powers from defamation or protection from defamation. It's saying that there now is a process for all elected members that if they wish to raise something to be mediated, doesn't have to escalate to the point of defamation. So it's, yeah.
Okay. No, look, I think that's clarification. Trish.
Sorry, Councillor Crackett, this is an excellent piece of work. And I really appreciate what you've done. And you probably won't like what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it. I think we need to be very careful about receiving information late. I know that there's a time pressure on, but I think when we bring things to the table and know that by tomorrow it's going to be has to be there, and we don't have the opportunity to reword it or whatever if we need, that it's important that we consider that when we're doing this. I'm not discounting what you've done, but I just feel that we have to be very careful here as councillors that we are not put under pressure because of time constraints.
Can we just clarify?
May I?
Yes, of course.
I absolutely agree with you. This has arisen because there's become a clear need, and we've had our own issues in the very immediate and recent present times, this has arisen as, I guess, as a collective result of the whole network going, hey, we need to do something about this. So the timeline from when all of that kicked off and the momentum that it's gaining to raise the standard of behaviour has all been in such quick succession. And if we don't get it in now, it kicks it to touch for another year, in which time we lose the momentum, the conversation dies, and nothing is actually done.
So how firm is
I
it?
do appreciate that.
Sorry. So how firm is the 24 hours that we have? When is the actual AGM?
So the AGM's
July,
about the 24th of July.
So we're sitting here in May.
But this is the LGNZ timeframe because LGNZ then have a lot of work
It's
to
in
do.
their constitution.
Yeah. This is when it has to be.
It's constitutional.
Yeah.
And it is only an investigation. Yeah,
Okay.
we're not actually.
And I guess the second point to note on that is that the second resolution there is for ICC, for this council to endorse the remit. The young elected members have already done that. This council does not need to if there was disquiet about the wording. But I certainly pick from today's meeting that there is a lot of encouragement around that. But I just need to raise that as that resolution 2 is ICC also adding their council name to this remit.
Okay, Rangi.
Just a quick one on the actual LGNZ conference. Who is our delegate at the actual conference?
You are.
Grant.
Yeah. He
Grant
was
is the voting delegate.
Grant is he?
You were there at the
But
time he was nominated. I remember.
You're the backup. No, you are the delegate. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you going to speak to this at the?
Young elected members committee will.
Yeah,
but
they
you're
would.
very welcome to as well if you would like to.
Yeah, because obviously if we endorse it, then you'll be.
Well, we
required
can
to speak.
presumably nominate somebody to present it as. But in absent that,
There's
Grant's the man.
Yeah, I'd work with Alex to. Well, you're technically a young member.
Look, could I suggest? I'm going to take it for granted that we remove the paragraph in italics. Alex, I'm going to take it for granted that we do remove the paragraph in italics.
Sure.
With that understanding, I think we have to move forward on a take it or leave it basis, on the basis that this is not actually a remit. We are simply supporting the remit. So we don't need to agree every single word. We are simply, backing them up to the nosebleeds, as it were. So on that basis, will somebody move number 1 and number 2, and number 2 caveated by the fact that the paragraph in that the offending paragraph must be removed. Paragraph in
it's just the italics paragraph.
Happy to
should be
second it.
removed.
Yep.
So Tricia's moved it. Ray, were you seconding it?
Oh, I can. Yeah.
Any other discussion? Yes, Evelyn.
I'm just pointing out that the remit is only actually 50 words. What the rest of it is why it's been brought forward, the explanation. So the remit itself is actually quite succinct.
So what goes externally? Is it the 50 words or is it the whole 3 or 4 pages?
It all gets condensed in the AGM pack. Members will read the proposed remit and then they'll choose to continue on into the background should they wish to. They're not required to sit there and glued there to read the entire thing, but it's just to provide as much context as to why the issue is important.
So that's fine. So it's been moved and seconded, and with that point of clarification, we'll take the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against?
Aye.
Who said aye? Alan? Okay. You want that noted, Alan?
No.
No? Okay. Okay then, so the motion is carried. Thank you, Alex, for all your work in drafting that and bringing that forward. And if it gets through the, I guess, exhaustive process that LGNZ will go through to get something up, then, it's a bit of history, isn't it?
Well done, Alex.
Well done. Okay, the next paper is the IVEM Director Removal and Appointment. I think the removal part is pretty straightforward, isn't it? Yes. To short circuit the next part of it.
I can speak very quickly to this, Chair.
Okay.
IVEM is a shelf company, of
Yeah.
which I'm the current standing director. We need a second director. We have an annual meeting. That's it.
Okay.
There are no director fees.
So I'm going to cut across all of that and just suggest myself, if people to be the second director, given that I think the only piece of work is to actually wind up the business. So
Happy to nominate Councillor Campbell, the Deputy Mayor, to be the named councillor in
Sounds like-
recommendation 3.
Sounds like
Thank you.
Putin
And I'll second that.
Okay, those in
But he has
favour?
the same,
Aye.
Those against? Okay, popular acclamation, thank you.
We now have to move 1 to 4, and I'm happy to do that too, because as Darren says, this is very straightforward. It's appointing someone so we can wind up a company we never intend to use again.
I thought it was the same person.
I can second.
Is there a second?
I'm going to move her in a second.
Oh, we have to move that it's actually then wound up.
Yeah,
I
we're
see, okay.
we're receiving
So
the report.
we have a
and removing
mover.
Lindsay and
Did
Ria.
somebody
And I second
second?
it.
Thanks.
Ria seconded.
Is there any further discussion? Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. So that takes us to the end of the agenda, and we will move to public excluded. If someone will move that. Thank you. I'll take down and Grant seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And just before everybody goes, the tens of thousands of people who are watching this avidly at home, thank you for watching, and good night, goodbye.
A word from our sponsor.